The first time I met Arlena Atwood, she was screaming at a pine tree. I had just pulled my truck into the gravel drive outside my cabin, mind you, when I heard the shrieking echoing through the forest. I stepped out, stretched my legs, and spotted her storming down the road in a pink tracksuit, waving her phone in the air like it was a sword. "You can't park here," she barked, squinting at me like I was the devil himself. I blinked, looked around to make sure I hadn't mistakenly parked on someone's petunias, and said, "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "I'm head of the High Pines HOA, she announced, puffing out her chest. "And you are trespassing." I should have known then she'd be trouble. The bleach-blonde bob, the oversized sunglasses, the clipboard tucked under her arm, even in the woods, Arlena was a full-blown HOA Karen in the wild. "My name's Elias Hargrove," I said calmly. "I own this cabin and the access road, all the way down to your place." She stopped mid-step. "No, you don't. That road is HOA maintained. You can't just drive up here and start squatting." I laughed, not out of rudeness, but because I genuinely found it funny. "I bought this cabin 2 years ago, came with the deed to the entire road. It's private property. Maybe check the county records before calling me a squatter." She didn't like that, her lip curled. Phone still in hand, she turned slightly, muttering, "We'll see what the sheriff says about that." And just like that, she dialed 911. Within minutes, a deputy rolled in. Arlena flagged him down like she was directing a plane on a runway. "That man is trespassing," she insisted before the poor guy even got out of his cruiser. "He's parked illegally on private HOA roads and refuses to leave." The deputy, a calm guy in his 40s named Brian, walked over to me. "Mind showing me some ID and ownership papers, sir?" "Sure thing," I replied, already pulling out the folder I kept in my truck's glove box. I'd dealt with nosy neighbors before, though never one this determined. I handed him the deed, highlighted section and all. He read through it, whistled low, and then turned back to Arlena. "Ma'am, this road up to and including your driveway is owned by Mr. Hargrove. It's clearly stated here. This isn't under HOA jurisdiction." Arlena's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. "That can't be right," she blurted. "We've been maintaining this road for years." I raised an eyebrow. "Funny, I've been paying for all the grading and gravel delivery myself. Got receipts if you want." She didn't. Deputy Brian gave her a warning about abusing emergency services and left her sputtering on the side of the road. I thought that'd be the end of it, but I underestimated how far an HOA Karen would go when her authority is threatened. By the following weekend, I noticed someone had yanked out the wooden post with a private drive no trespassing sign I'd installed years back at the road's entrance. It wasn't whether that did at the base was sawed clean. No note, no explanation, just gone. Nothing subtle about it. I replaced it with a steel post sunk into concrete and added a trail camera facing the bend in the road near her house. I figured if someone was bold enough to tamper with property, it was only a matter of time before they did it again, and I wanted it on record this time. 2 mornings later, I caught movement on the camera's feed while sipping coffee on my porch. A red golf cart rolled into view. It was one of those candy apple ones with gold trim, the kind rich retirees drive around in Florida gated communities. Arlena was perched behind the wheel, and in the passenger seat sat a man I hadn't seen before. Wiry build, tan skin, and a clipboard of his own. He had the look of someone who took himself too seriously. I walked down to the road as they pulled up. "Morning," I said, leaning against the split-rail fence. Admiring the view, the man stepped out. "I'm Wendell Sharp. I serve as legal counsel for the High Pines HOA." "Interesting," I replied. "And what brings you to my driveway?" Arlena dismounted with theatrical flair, brushing invisible dust off her sleeves. "Mr. Hargrove," Wendell said, "we're here to notify you that the HOA has voted to assume maintenance and regulatory control over the access road that runs through your property, effective immediately." I almost laughed. "That's not how property law works," he nodded, flipping open the clipboard. The HOA board has passed a resolution stating that since the road services multiple homes, it qualifies as a public easement under community necessity. We've filed the documentation with the county registrar. You filed something claiming control over land you don't own, I asked. He gave a tight nod. We expect full compliance. Starting next month, you'll be assessed quarterly road maintenance dues, and any modifications or vehicle storage will require prior approval. Arlena looked triumphantly toward the tree line, as if expecting applause. I walked up to Wendell, keeping my voice even. Let me be clear, I own this road. It doesn't service your homes, it ends before your driveways begin. It's a private spur, not a thoroughfare. You try to bill me for anything, I'll see you in court. Wendell gave a hollow chuckle. Then we'll let a judge decide. They turned back toward the golf cart, and I caught Arlena whispering, he'll fold. They always fold once the letters start. That night, I started digging. I spent 3 hours combing through county archives and public filings from the HOA. And that's when I found a proposal submitted just 6 weeks earlier to extend HOA boundaries by redrawing the map to include the road and several adjacent parcels they didn't own. But here's the kicker. The proposal had been rejected. Twice. The county land assessor had flagged it as non-compliant with jurisdictional authority. They tried to annex my property and failed. Then they turned around and pretended they'd succeeded. It was a bluff. A long, arrogant bluff. I printed everything. Hard copies, digital backups. Full documentation from the county portal, including the rejection letters. 3 days later, a formal letter arrived. It was on HOA letterhead and signed by Arlena herself. It demanded payment of a retroactive infrastructure assessment, totaling $1,900, citing unpaid road use fees. It also claimed that I was in violation of Section 3B of the Community Harmony Code for unauthorized vehicle presence on communal surfaces. I called the county clerk the next morning and scheduled a public records verification. They confirmed everything I already knew. The HOA had no right to make or enforce any decisions regarding my property. They'd submitted fraudulent filings. Now it was time to escalate. I called an old friend of mine from college, Ray Linford. She works in the Attorney General's office in the Property Crimes Division. I didn't ask for favors, I just asked for clarity. She reviewed the documents over lunch and raised her eyebrows midway through the first page. They filed this under penalty of perjury, she said. And they're using it to solicit money. That's textbook civil fraud. Depending on how many homeowners they've pulled this stunt on, it could be criminal too. I handed her a flash drive with every document I'd compiled. You planning to press this? She asked. I'm not letting it slide, I said. The following week, a county investigator named Luis Delgado paid a visit to High Pines. He didn't announce himself. He showed up with a camera crew from the local news, part of a civic transparency program the county had started after a few public corruption scandals. I didn't know about the cameras until the footage aired. It showed Luis walking up to the HOA office, an overbuilt shed next to the community pool where Arlena stood beneath a sunshade, drinking iced tea and barking orders into a walkie-talkie. When he asked about the annexation filings, she told him they'd been approved internally. When he asked if she'd seen the county's written rejection, she waved him off. We don't concern ourselves with every little bureaucratic hiccup. That quote ran on the evening news, twice. By that Friday, the HOA's lawyer had vanished from their website. His name was scrubbed from the board minutes. I later learned Wendell wasn't even licensed to practice law in our state. He'd been disbarred in Georgia for falsifying court documents. I filed a formal fraud complaint the same day. The county's legal team contacted me a week later with an update. They were opening a broader investigation into the HOA's financial records. Word spread fast. Homeowners started showing up at my cabin, confused and angry. Some had been paying road use fees for years. One guy, a retired firefighter named Joe, had been fined over $100 for dust pollution because his truck kicked up sediment on the gravel. I showed them the documents. Every single one. Within a month, 17 residents had signed a petition calling for a complete audit of the HOA board. By the end of the second month, Arlena's little empire was unraveling. But she wasn't done yet. One morning, I woke to find a construction crew at the edge of my property. No warning, no permits, just orange cones, a backhoe, and a guy with a measuring wheel muttering about easement widening. I stepped out with my phone already recording. "Who sent you?" I asked the foreman. He looked confused. "Got a work order from High Pines HOA. Said we were clearing the shoulder, said it was all approved." I walked him 20 feet back to the boundary marker. "You see this stake? That's the property line. You're standing on private land. If you so much as scratch that gravel, I'll have you cited for trespassing." He didn't argue. They packed up and left. That was the final straw. I filed for a restraining order against the HOA as an entity, and Arlena personally barring them from initiating any further contact, construction, or financial demands regarding my property. The judge granted it. Fast. In court, Arlena tried to play innocent. "We were just trying to improve community access," she said, voice quivering. It was all in good faith. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for pageantry, leaned over her bench and said, "You knowingly filed false documents to expand your control over land you don't own. That's not good faith. That's fraud." The HOA was fined. Arlena was removed from her position by a board vote that same night. And as for Wendell, the county issued a warrant for unauthorized practice of law. I didn't celebrate. I just replaced my trail camera with a proper security system and installed a gate at the property entrance for good measure. And I left the steel post standing like a monument, just in case anyone else forgot who owned the road. By early spring, the snowmelt had uncovered more than just patches of pine needles, and gravel. Something was off with the drainage ditch that ran alongside the lower stretch of my road, near where it curved behind a few of the newer cabins. Water wasn't flowing properly, it was pooling, seeping under the roadbed, and beginning to erode the shoulder. I hiked down the slope that afternoon, shovel in hand, thinking maybe some branches had blocked it. What I found instead was a concrete barrier about 2 feet high, hastily poured and hidden behind a row of stacked brush. Not a beaver dam, not runoff debris, a human-made obstruction. I ran my hand along the edge. It was still rough recent. Someone had deliberately diverted the water. I took photos from every angle, then called the county environmental office. They sent a field tech out the next morning. He crouched beside the barrier, scribbled notes, and let out a low breath. "This wasn't permitted," he said, "and it's already disrupting the watershed. Whoever did this could be facing fines or worse if it's tied to property damage downstream." 2 days later, the mystery unraveled in the least surprising way possible. A woman named Marla, who lived 3 houses down from Arlena, stopped by my gate with a bundle of papers in hand and a look that said she'd been holding something in for weeks. "She tried to get me to sign off on this," she said, handing me a diagram. "Said it would protect the HOA's landscaping budget if we could slow the runoff and reduce gravel washouts. I told her it was illegal. She said the county wouldn't check." I scanned the sketch. It was a crude map of the road area, with red marker lines where the water was supposed to be diverted right through the tree line and into my lower field. My property. She told others it was already approved, that it was part of the new infrastructure plan, Marla added. I didn't believe her, but I didn't know what to do until I saw your name on the news. I thanked her, filed the diagram with the environmental office, and forwarded copies to Ray at the Attorney General's office. An hour later, I got a call from a state investigator named Natalie Chang. She asked if I'd be willing to meet with her the next day and if I had any more documentation. I did. When she arrived, she brought more than just a notepad. She had a folder with subpoenas. "Your case triggered a deeper review," Natalie said as we walked my property. "Turns out, this HOA has a pattern. You weren't their first target, but you might be the first one with complete evidence and the will to stand them down. She showed me copies of complaints from other homeowners, some going back 5 years. Unauthorized assessments, retaliation for non-payment, forged signatures on board votes. One neighbor named Carla had been fined over $4,000 for non-compliant fencing, only to discover later that the so-called violation was never documented in any official code. "They've been operating like a shadow government," Natalie said, "fabricating authority where they have none and intimidating anyone who questions it. The concrete barrier, though, that was a whole new level. It wasn't just a nuisance. It was an environmental violation, potentially a felony if it caused structural damage or endangered downstream property. The county sent a demolition crew to remove it the following week." As they jackhammered the slab apart, I watched from the ridge, arms crossed, thinking about how far Arlena had been willing to go just to prove a point. She'd poured concrete into a drainage channel on private land without a permit and pretended it was for the community's benefit. It wasn't even clever, it was just reckless. That same day, Natalie served a subpoena at the HOA's monthly board meeting. She walked in unannounced, handed the packet directly to Arlena, and asked her to identify which contractors had been paid for the barrier work. Arlena's face went pale. Her voice, when it came, had none of its usual sharpness. "There must be some mistake," she said. "We didn't authorize any construction." "The invoice says otherwise," Natalie replied, holding up a printed receipt. "It's signed by you." And the payment came from the HOA's discretionary fund. Another resident, a quiet man named Paul who rarely spoke at meetings, stood up from the back row. "I was told it was part of a flood prevention measure," he said. "She claimed it was emergency work, said the board had voted, but we never did." "I never saw any vote." Natalie didn't respond. She just wrote it down. The next morning, Arlena's car was gone from her driveway. By the following week, so was she. It wasn't exactly a flight in the night, but it was close. Her house was listed for sale. A realtor's sign stood crooked in the grass, flapping in the wind. Word among the residents was that she'd left town entirely, moved in with a sister somewhere in Arizona. She never showed up for her scheduled interview with the state compliance office, but her mess remained. The board was forced to hold an emergency election. For the first time in years, residents showed up in numbers. I watched from a distance as new members were sworn in, most of them regular folks who just wanted peace and basic upkeep without the drama. Marla was elected treasurer. Paul took over as president. I was asked to attend the first meeting under the new leadership. I hesitated at first. I wasn't a member, never had been, but they made it clear they wanted transparency, and that meant listening to the guy Arlena had tried to bulldoze, literally and figuratively. At the meeting, I handed over a full report, copies of every document, every invoice, every letter she'd sent me. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it so the next time someone tried to manipulate the rules, the community would have the tools to push back. Paul cleared his throat after I finished and looked around the room. "We owe you an apology," he said. "All of us. We let someone speak for us who didn't speak for anyone but herself. That ends now." The room was quiet, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the stillness of people realizing they'd been asleep at the wheel, and that it was time to change. Over the next few weeks, the audit uncovered more. Arlena had used HOA funds for personal expenses, gas, spa visits, even a hotel stay 2 counties over. Records showed that several maintenance projects had been billed twice, with checks cashed under a fake contractor name that traced back to a P.O. box in her maiden name. Natalie's office compiled everything and forwarded it to the state prosecutor. A grand jury convened in June. The charges were serious: misappropriation of funds, fraudulent filings, environmental violations, and obstruction of justice. She was indicted on 6 counts. When the news broke, it made the front page of the local paper under the headline, "HOA leader faces felony charges in property scheme." I didn't gloat, but I did sleep better. The road stayed quiet after that. No more golf carts with gold trim, no more clipboard crusades. One afternoon, as I was hauling gravel with my trailer, Joe the retired firefighter pulled up beside me in his pickup. He leaned out the window, grinning. "You know," he said, "I always thought this place was peaceful. Turns out it just needed a little fire to burn the rot out." I nodded. "Sometimes peace comes after the fight." He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel. "You sticking around, long as the road's mine," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." And I meant it. The first hint that things weren't quite over came on a Sunday in early July, just after a thunderstorm rolled down from the ridge and soaked everything in a half-hour burst. The gravel road, usually packed tight, had softened enough that tire tracks stood out like ink on paper. And that's how I noticed the pattern. 4 narrow tires pulling in, but only 2 ever left. Whatever vehicle it was had entered after midnight and stayed. I followed the tracks on foot, through the bend and past the spot where the illegal drainage barrier had once been. About 100 yards past that, tucked just beyond the tree line near one of the old hunting trails, I found a black SUV half covered in a camo tarp. Windows tinted, no license plate on the front. The rear one had been removed entirely. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I walked back to my cabin, called the sheriff's office, and gave them the coordinates. 2 deputies arrived within the hour, this time with a county investigator in tow. They took one look at the SUV and radioed for a tow truck. No one showed up to claim it all day. By the next morning, the vehicle had been impounded and entered into evidence. It turned out the SUV had been reported stolen from a dealership over in Red Pine Flats 2 weeks earlier, before Arlena skipped town. The ignition had been tampered with, and the VIN had been filed off the dashboard. The sheriff's office didn't say much, but I could tell from their tone that this was more than a stolen car dumped in the woods. Later that week, I received a call from Natalie Chang again. "We traced the SUV rental back to a shell company," she said. "It was registered under a holding name used in several HOA expenditures. Same address as the fake contractor accounts. We're connecting dots now, Elias, and it's looking uglier than expected." She didn't elaborate, but I didn't press. I trusted her to follow it where it led. 2 days after that, I got a visit from someone I hadn't seen before. A man in his 60s, pressed khakis, hiking boots still caked in red clay, and a badge clipped to his belt. He introduced himself as Special Agent Dorsey with the State Bureau of Investigation's White Collar Division. He asked if I had time to talk. We sat on the porch and he opened a thick folder. "There's evidence suggesting the HOA was laundering money," he said. "Not just embezzling, but cycling funds through inflated maintenance contracts, the concrete barrier. That cost was billed at nearly $30,000. The actual work was worth maybe $500. That's not incompetence. That's criminal intent." I leaned back and let that settle. "You think she was planning to run?" She made 3 wire transfers to an offshore account in the 48 hours before her disappearance, Dorsey said. "And we've got security footage from a motel in Nevada placing her there 6 days ago. She's using an alias now. She's not just hiding from embarrassment, she's dodging extradition." The investigation widened. The new HOA board cooperated fully, turning over files stored in locked cabinets, ledgers that had been kept off the books, handwritten logs of incident fines that never made it to the official treasurer reports, and a stack of signed waivers that no resident remembered authorizing. But the most damning piece came from a USB drive found in the secretary's desk drawer. It was labeled simply Meetings. On it were recordings, actual audio files from the board's closed-door sessions, and in one of them, Arlena's voice came through clearly. "If we don't get those properties looped in, we lose our leverage. That road is the spine of the whole thing. We can't have some lone wolf with a deed wrecking our budget." There was a pause, then the sharp tap of a gavel. "If we all agree, we push the annexation paperwork. Let the county sort it out later." Another voice, uncertain, asked, "Is that legal?" Arlena replied, "Legal enough." That audio file became the centerpiece of the indictment. At the arraignment hearing held in Clark County, she appeared in court wearing a borrowed suit 2 sizes too large, her hair now a dull brown and tied back in a way that looked uncharacteristically plain. No sunglasses, no clipboard, just cuffs and a bailiff at each elbow. The judge denied bail. Count 1 was wire fraud. Count 2 was conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Count 3 was environmental tampering. Count 4 was obstruction of justice. There were 7 counts in total, and the DA hinted more might follow depending on what the forensic accountants uncovered. I attended the hearing out of obligation, not satisfaction. I didn't need to see her shuffled around in shackles to feel like justice was working. But I did feel something shift when the judge read out the charges. A kind of collective exhale from the community that had spent too long under the weight of her control. After the hearing, I stepped outside and found Marla waiting near the courthouse steps, arms folded, watching the reporters pack up their gear. She always looked down at us, she said quietly. Like she was running a country club instead of a neighborhood. She ran it like a racket, I said, and she thought no one would notice. Marla looked at me. You were the first one who didn't back down. I didn't have an answer for that. I just told her the truth. Someone had to. Back in High Pines, the changes came faster than expected. The new board passed a resolution capping all assessments until a third-party audit could be completed. They opened every future meeting to the public and installed security cameras in the HOA office for transparency. They even invited the county to host a workshop on homeowner rights, something that had never happened before in the region. And the road. I had a new gate installed, this one with license plate recognition tied to a whitelist. It wasn't about keeping people out. It was about making sure no one else tried to claim what wasn't theirs. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the treetops, Paul stopped by with 2 mason jars of blueberry jam his wife had made. We're planting a real community garden next month, he said. Not one of those manicured HOA things, just something where people can grow what they want, I nodded. Need help with the irrigation lines, he grinned. We were hoping you'd say that. The laughter that followed was the kind that only comes after a storm, the kind you earn. A few weeks later, I received a certified letter from the county registrar's office. Enclosed was a formal copy of the rejected annexation request, now stamped with a new notation in bold red letters, permanently denied. Fraudulent filing. Not eligible for resubmission. I framed it and hung it in the cabin's entryway, just beneath the photo of my grandfather who'd built the place with his own hands in the 60s. He'd always said land wasn't just something you owned, it was something you protected. I finally understood what he meant. The road stayed quiet through the rest of the summer. No more late-night vehicles, no more clipboard crusades, just the crunch of gravel under tires, the hum of cicadas, and the occasional deer crossing near the bend, and Arlena. She took a plea deal that fall. 5 years with parole eligibility after 3, plus restitution to the community fund. Her lawyer called it a tragedy of ambition, but those of us who lived through it knew the truth. It wasn't ambition, it was hubris, and in the end, the road didn't just lead to her house. It led straight to justice.